Okay, I'd like to call the work session to order. First item on the agenda, greenhouse construction and funding. Ms. Rose.
Well, I know we talked about this at the last meeting, but we've been talking about this since May, I think, and we really have not made any progress. I know that we did talk with the solar energy company, and they said they would give $5,000 if the commissioners pass some sort of ordinance. Well, that hasn't passed. It's been put on hold. Ms. Dowdy said that there were grants available, and Ms. Dowdy, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. We have looked into the Golden Leaf Foundation's grant, which is an open grant program. Part one of the process is a letter of inquiry saying you have an interest in applying for a grant. You have to contact Golden Leaf staff. So I reached out to Mark Sorrells, who's one of the board members for Golden Leaf. He gave some guidance into what needs to be part of that application process. I sent a draft to Ms. Swain for her to review of the narratives for the grant process. The hard part's going to be having a strong economic justification about why we can't prepare students for job demand or job opportunities. So Mark said you really need to reach out to workforce development, get data statistics about what the job market looks like. I did that and talked with Emily Nicholson and the Northeastern Workforce Development Board. She gave me some statistics for nursery supervisors, nursery management, greenhouse management. She said there's not really a lot on turf grass management, but it's showing a decline in the job market. So that's going to be the hard sell for Golden Leaf to support the grant. Is we're going to have to go a different route and perhaps look at the opportunity for STEM education and what it would mean for STEM education versus workforce development, because statistics don't support the workforce development in our region. As crazy as that seems, there's just the labor market's not supporting those numbers. So we'll have to shift gears in the narrative and really kind of look at it from a STEM perspective, what a greenhouse opportunity offers up for biology students, not just ag ed students, but a biology class to be part of, you know, all different areas, you know, whether it's English, language arts, math, art, those types of things, and try to draft that narrative to show maybe a STEM interest, not just workforce development. Because Golden Leaf supports agriculture grants, workforce development grants, STEM education grants, and so that's going to be the route. I thought it would be workforce development and ag, but the labor statistics, and Mark said with Golden Leaf, that's really what they want to see is that pipeline. How is it preparing for the job market?
So at this point, we haven't applied for a grant.
It's not until December. So the grant application's due in December, and then you would get a February consideration for the grant.
And I did talk to Commissioner Hanig, and I believe that the commissioners have a retreat in January. He indicated to me that he was putting that on the list for the commissioners to discuss, because back in May, they said that they would help. But no one has taken the initiative to spearhead the project.
Mr. Pratt, you wanted to talk about commercial greenhouses?
Yeah, I think, well, I failed to bring the publication I had that I got mailed for some of the business I did, but coincidentally, they had different sized greenhouses in there. And when I started looking at the cost, obviously there might be some things that we would like to add on to them, but the cost seemed wide-ranging. And so my thought was that we could look at like, well, I'm on Nice Island, so I do a lot of traveling through Southern Virginia Beach and Chesapeake, but what comes to mind, and I used to live in Portsmouth and deal with vendors out in Suffolk when I was in another line of work. I dealt with places like Venice Creek, Wholesale Nursery, Lancaster Farms, Linsky Plant Farms, where they're growing a lot of trade type annuals and perennials and different things. I'm assuming that when you mentioned they had a lot of plant sales and such, that these type of greenhouses would function quite well for them. So my thought being also, back when I did landscaping, I took some courses over at the Untitled college for horticulture and agriculture, and they had at that time a pretty good, horticulture program. So where I'm going with it is maybe we might want to be better served looking at people that build these units for commercialized production and or that have already been on education campuses like the one I mentioned or others possibly, and make a comparison as to if they're having a concrete floor, a gravel floor, how many outlets they have over the course of 96 feet. I think that was the number you used for the projected length. Where I'm going with it is I'm not so sure that just because somebody builds for an educational purpose that it might be better or even different, but it likely would cost more is where I'm going with it. So I was just wanting to make sure we're getting the most bang for the buck, whomever's paying for it, whether it's the commissioners, which is the taxpayers, which includes me, or it's the school, which includes the taxpayer, which includes me, or if it's a grant. I want to make sure those individuals get the most bang for their buck.
I don't think that there's any objections to that. I think that, you know, they do like what the specifications are of the educational greenhouse, but I don't think that they would mind, certainly if we could find a different builder.
Yeah, I wasn't saying that that
one.
might not be the best one. I was
Yeah.
just commenting that if they're gonna work in the workplace, in that is their objective, or they wanna do a commercial style production, maybe they might, or whomever is gonna be instrumental in pushing this project along, might be better served by looking at some of the resources, which I apologize for not bringing, but I can supply you with a couple vendors that I know of, and or tour some of these other facilities and ask them or call them whom puts them up for them, and basically see what they are paying and what that service is offering. That's all, just to get a fair comparison. That's all I was trying to do. What happened was I was gonna buy some drip line for some peach trees, and I'm going through there and I'm looking, and lo and behold, greenhouses. And I started looking at the costs, and I was like, wow, this is a wide range. And that's what I do. That's what I do with my business, is that I look around and I try to make sure that I'm gonna get the most bang for the buck, no matter what I'm doing. Okay, whether I'm working on a film set or buying oil or whatever I'm doing, I'm trying to maximize my money. That's my nature.
Do we need to do something to say, I mean, I don't even know that we've said we wanna build a greenhouse. I mean, where do we need to go now, Bill?
Well, we talked about if it's a priority, putting it in the capital outlay budget for, next school year. This will give us more time to explore, you know, what Will had talked about, you know, to see exactly what it is that we want.
And maybe by that time, the commissioners will have met in January and see if they support it as well.
Right.
And we may have some grant situations. Wasn't there some suggestion about the fact that there was a grant through, Farm Bureau, that Farm Bureau had some kind of grant? Did I hear that?
I think that is like $5,000.
It's like $2,500.
Yeah.
Okay,
2,500.
wasn't, which every little bit helps, but yeah, it's not significant, okay.
All right, next item, review of policy 6420, contracts with the board. Mr. Currituck?
Yeah, I think B and C are gonna be, both policies, I guess, have a paragraph of, the amount of money that we authorized from increasing from $50,000 to $90,000 for purchases under those two, policies, without, the board's approval. And so I voted in favor of that last meeting, and I've kind of mulled those over, and we've been having some pretty, eye-opening budget discussions also going on. And, I'm having a little heartburn about that decision. So I would like to revert that back to $50,000. And, I changed my mind, and that's where I'm at. I'm not coming. We have a budget that is very, very tough right at the moment, and I'm concerned about that. I'm very concerned about it. So,
I can't remember what the reasoning was behind, can you?
We went from 50,000 to 90,000 that we had to have board approval.
Okay.
It's mostly, for timing issues. In the summer, so we can get summer projects done, things come up, and we wanna roll on it. We also added in the policy that if the board has already approved the project in the capital outlay budget, cause that's a line item budget, then we would not have to, that would be an exception. And, because it's sorta like we're getting double approval.
Okay.
You approve it in the capital outlay budget, and then we get a contract, and then we come back and we get it approved again. And also property insurance, cause that goes over to $90,000, and, diesel fuel and utilities. We raised it mainly to make operations easier. And that $90,000 is the amount when we have to formally bid goods and purchases and services.
But would you be okay with it if it was not a reoccurring, expense?
meaning that
Meaning if it was, such as Laurie's saying, with
if
it
it
being,
wasn't the things that she just mentioned, that
and then they could either poll the board, or,
I'm in favor of that. Look, if it's already in the, previous budget and we've approved it, I can understand your point there. And then, of course, the other things that you just mentioned. My concern is that there could be some unanticipated situations come up. And, I don't know, $90,000 is a lot of money. You'd be surprised, you wouldn't, but a lot of others, including myself sometimes, see, how impacting, $40,000 is the differential between 50 and 90. That's a lot of money. I mean, in our game, it doesn't seem like it, but it is, and I'm not trying to hold anything up. Just trying to make sure that every time we turn around, we're talking about we're at a fund balance and we're broke, and I'm not suggesting that you guys wouldn't be doing, your part. I'm just saying, I'm not comfortable with it. That's what I'm saying. So, that's all I'm saying, and I just feel like that's a lot of money. I think it needs to have some layers of checks and balances. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, ask the board to mull that over, and, if you see a need to, change that, let me know by, next school board meeting.
I'd like to vote on it tonight.
It's not on the
If the school,
agenda.
it's not on the agenda, we can put it on the agenda.
How do you feel about it, Jane?
How do I feel about it?
Yeah.
Well, honestly speaking, we voted to do this at the last meeting,
We did.
and, now we're changing our mind.
I have changed my mind. You didn't necessarily say you changed yours. I am not comfortable.
I think we should put it on the agenda in December. Give us a month to look over it, and let's talk about it in December. Either we keep it the way we agreed upon in October, or we can change it.
Okay,
That's reasonable, I think.
all right.
That would also give us a chance, we'll have to contact the lawyer again, and get a new policy proposal written up.
Yeah.
Was this, this was done on the recommendation of state,
School Board
Board of
Association.
Directors, yeah.
Well, I now worked with Rod Malone to help get the lingo in the policy changed. We realized that we had some conflicting policies, so we weren't exactly following this policy to the letter of the law, and as we started trying to follow it, it kind of slowed us up this summer because we had to wait for approval on several projects, but, and
Well-
he even said to me, well, you're gonna have to work into this now that you realize you're really not doing it correctly. we worked into it, but then I started talking about, well, what could we amend, like the capital outlay projects that were approved, utilities, things that are just normal business operations.
So basically, if we kept with this policy, then without our authorization, you could decide that you were gonna build that $76,000 greenhouse.
No,
It'd have to be in the capital outlay budget.
Or
I
it could be
see.
listed as a repair, and they could leave a little square foot of the foundation, and they sure could do that.
no.
Yeah, they could.
But that's not the way we want.
I'm not saying they would, I'm saying they could. You asked if they could, and I'm telling you, legally they could. Now, would they? Probably not. You know,
Definitely not.
don't
I
think
think
you had to say
let's
can
have a
because
little
they
bit of
can.
time to mull over it again, and let's talk about it in December, is what I would say.
Okay. I think that's a consensus, so we'll put it on the December board agenda. Okay, next item, state superintendent meeting update. And this is a meeting that we had with State Superintendent Mark Johnson and Ms. Dowdy, myself, Mr. Monroe, and Mr. Stefanik went up there to talk with them specifically about CTE. And give us a briefing of what happened there.
Sure. I think as Mr. Stefanik had said before, we had an original meeting scheduled when hurricanes rolled through, so we had to reschedule. And so on November 1st, we had the opportunity to go before Mark Johnson, State CTE Director, what's his name again? Trey Michael, yes. Trey Michael, and another of Mr. Johnson's staff members. And so we were able to have time at the table with him to talk about diploma track options, to talk about the one-size-fits-all model that we currently push students through upon high school graduation, and really asking them to talk about in legislature the option of giving students options for what that diploma looks like upon completion of high school. And I did bring with you copies of the presentation that we gave to Mr. Johnson, so that you would have a copy of it. I can give one for Bill because he already has one.
There you go.
And again, I'm not gonna go through that whole presentation with you, but it's really for you to be able to read and look through at your leisure. But the biggest thing was asking for a proponent of really looking at personalized learning. We say all across DPI's website and in every school system that we're really about personalizing learning for students, and then we push every kid through a square hole and say, get through there, because that's what you have to do. Whether I'm going trade, whether I'm going four-year university, whether I'm going straight to work or to the military, you all have to have the exact same requirements to graduate high school. And even though we're given some flexibility as high school administrators to substitute in certain instances, when we do that, we are then penalized in our accountability model. So you can't say you have flexibility, but then penalize us when we use that flexibility. So we really just put those issues to the forefront when we were sitting in front of him. He did express that he had been in Louisiana talking about 2 different diploma track options down there in their state and exploring that opportunity. And he said from his office that it is definitely something that's important to him, especially as he worked in an inner city Charlotte school as a teacher, though a brief time, that he saw that it's really hard to fit all kids through that same model and push everybody to the same diploma track. So we had some really great discussion. Again, it's all about legislature and where that goes from here. And so our follow-up question to him was really, who has to move on that? Is that a legislative update? Is that a State Board of Education update? Where do we get traction to go back and look at those diploma track options like we had in years prior for those of us who were around during that time, where students had a different 3 to 4 different diploma track options to graduate high school. So again, it felt like a productive meeting, but as with anything in legislature, you know, it takes mountains to move. I got a little bit of the bug to do lobby work up there, because that's where people have to be able to stand up there who've been in the business and been in the trenches to say, look, this doesn't make sense. But it was a good meeting, and hopefully we'll continue to get some ground. He did mention a couple of pilot options with some workforce development stuff with Mr. Monroe that perhaps CTE can be on the forefront of, and that they would include us on coming in the spring. So we're excited about those opportunities. But again, we just wanted to spread the message that really the one-size-fits-all model isn't work. We can't say we personalize education, but then have an end result that's the same for everybody. It doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda, revised meeting dates for 2019. Our February 7th meeting is going to be moved to the 13th, March 7th to March 13th, and April 4th to April 10th. And those are all Wednesdays that they're being moved to, because that's the only day that the commissioner's room is open. Okay, 2018-19 calendar revisions. Superintendent Stefanik.
Thank you, Dr. Dowdney, and fellow board members. As Renee already talked about, some things that were postponed due to the hurricane. We missed a little bit of school during the hurricane, but nowhere near the amount of school that the counties missed that were in the federal disaster areas in North Carolina. But with all the high number of counties impacted, the General Assembly has given us some flexibility with our calendar and the days that were missed. There are actually two different pieces to the legislation. First off, just for the board's information, we missed 5 days of school due to Hurricane Florence. With the legislation, we need to claim 2 days as being missed, but then the other 3 student days, we can declare that they were school days. We don't have to declare them as being missed days of school. For teachers and staff, we have the option of declaring all 5 days as school being open. And that piece of the legislation keeps any staff member from having to use leave for any of the days they didn't come into work. But for any of this to be put into practice, we have to have board action. They said in this that they're giving the options, and it's up to each local board to decide what they want to do for their calendar revisions. My recommendation would be claim the 2 days, student days missed as far as tracking our hours on our annual calendar, and then allow the teachers to not have to use any leave for the 5 days that were used for dealing with the hurricane or the after effects of the hurricane.
Is that just teachers or teachers and staff?
It's everybody.
Okay.
It's all staff, and they even went into the point of saying that they used some of their disaster relief money and put it into account so that the federal employees, i.e. our food service workers, they could get compensated without having to use leave as well.
Did we have employees come in for some of those days?
Yes.
So, those that came in just came in?
No, we're going to have discussions with those folks at the building level
Okay,
on what we can do for them.
great.
Your suggestion is the consent agenda tonight, right?
Yes.
And so we're gonna vote on this tonight?
If anybody, well, it's part of the consent agenda.
It's on the consent agenda that
You
if
don't
you're
agree
okay with this
Everybody has
recommendation, you
I
just say
think
yes.
that's a great idea.
Your
I'm all in favor.
suggestion being what you just said,
Yes.
okay,
Yes.
not what you're gonna do at the building office. That's not a part of the consent agenda.
Right, because they said that was really up to the, like individual buildings and how they handled that. And I can let you know as not part of the official meeting what we can do for those folks.
Okay.
Okay.
As long as we're doing something.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
yes, we're doing
Okay.
something.
every building to be taken care of.
Right, yeah. needs to be-
Except, no.
No.
Okay, next item, school capacity, Superintendent Stefanik.
Yes, a little while back, Matt Mullins and I did the grand tour of the school district, and we walked all the hallways of the buildings with an administrator, and we were looking at educational spaces. We'll call them that. The board, over the last 7 years, has seen 2 different capacity studies done by the state, and those are listed in whatever color that is, off to the far right of the chart, the last 2 columns. As you can see, same buildings, no major renovations done with any of the buildings, and we have different numbers. That caused some confusion, and then the planning department, they had worked with our central office administration sometime in the past, and they have a set of numbers, and as you can see, none of the 3 numbers match up. So, to further muddy that, Mr. Mullins and I walked around and we were looking for what we call full-size educational spaces. And basically, just to give you a framework, somewhere around upper 700 square feet and larger. Those would be our regular classroom sizes. Or what we call supplemental spaces or supplemental rooms. And those would be breakout rooms, small group rooms, and again, for our information, less than 600 square feet. And so when we went through, you can see the available number of rooms in gray for each building. Then there are different calculations. Again, just to give you about as many scenarios as you could possibly think of. We added a column in there in light orange. That's the ADM as of this month at the schools, just so you get an idea of the number of students at every building. If you look at the bottom, capacity A, we are funded, i.e. given a number of teachers based on our student ADM at different levels. And you can see all the different designated class sizes that we're funded at from K through 12. When we put those numbers into the building capacities with available rooms, we're not putting anybody in the supplemental rooms because they come out of a homeroom, if you will, or a class to get breakout services. So we're just using available full-size rooms. When we put those numbers in the capacity, that gives you what you see in column A. I take you to Currituck High School's number with the state funded number of almost 1 to 29 per class. Look at how many people you can put in that building. It would be very crowded, at the building, and I don't believe that's anybody's, hope for an educational site in this district. Capacity B, what we did there is we took the K through 3 numbers, and then for grades 9 through 12, we put a class size average of 1 to 25. So in essence, we took 4 students off of the state-funded class size, and we put that in, and that's where you get capacity B. You notice in all the elementary schools, the numbers stay the same. Actually, in the middle schools too, we just worked on grades 9 through 12. Then in capacity C, this is where we tried to get a couple of years ago when we added 11 teachers to the district. We tried to get every building to an average class size of 1 to 20. And that would give you what you see in capacity C. So you're taking the available rooms and you're just multiplying those by 20. Makes the math very easy, and you come up with the capacities there. Those numbers come pretty close to what the planning department was using, in their model. Again, not exact, but they're in the ballpark of what the planning department was using. So either this board or this board in consultation with the commissioners in a future joint meeting, we have to come to a decision about what capacities we're comfortable with, because that'll trigger how full each of our buildings is, and it will trigger when the next planning process for a potential new building will come up.
All right, so first of all, the DPI study to the far right,
Yes.
it's my understanding why you saw the lower grades, the 6 elementary schools, go down from 2011 to 2016, 210, 11, 213, 16, is because they had used a smaller footprint, if you will. Their calculation, they changed their calculations. They were saying you could use the same space, but you could only have a lesser amount of students.
Yeah, they were using the new K through 3 numbers.
Right.
Yes.
And then what happened at the high school, you go on the same chart and you go down to 2010, 2011. Excuse me, and you see 1,000 students. Then you go over to the left and you see 1144, 5 years later, same company, same study, same building. no renovation, no modification. Somehow they said, oh, you can have 1,144 students. Well, that's because they said, well, you can have more students in the same amount of space. Is that correct? Okay, because I've been tracking this for some time.
Yep.
All right? And somehow or another, the county, because I had meetings with the county before I got elected on the board, and I went over there and I sat with Ben Wood, who's the planning department, and I sat with Mike Payne, and I said, your numbers are wrong. And I said, how can you have a plan without, call yourself a planning department, and you don't have the correct numbers for schools, the size? And so all the numbers are right. So, well, we pay for a study, and the commissioner sign off on it, and the Board of Education, and Mark signs off on it every 5 years. And here's the study, and your numbers don't match the study. And they said, oh yeah, oh, well, we don't know what's going on here. Oh, not exactly, but basically. And so now all of a sudden the planning department's saying, well, the high school can have 1,216, which is over the capacity that's already increased by 144 in the 5 years when the state reduced the footprint that the students could have. And then somehow or another we got over here to the far left, we're saying the smallest capacity that we see is 1,320 students. Are we gonna tell the commissioners that that high school in its current state, without any renovation, can accommodate 1,320 students? Is that what I'm saying?
20 students per classroom.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Because
It can have a third more,
that's, apparently that's what they're saying.
basically.
How do you feel
Just
about that,
under a third.
Mr.
Dr. Matt?
Dr. Matten?
Well, my experience with, wow, those numbers would be mighty tight. We're at about 980 now.
Right.
But again, I'm trying to read those numbers. It's one of those 116.
1320.
Oh, my.
1650 and 1880.
Well, there's no, 1880 is,
That's
is
it.
unrealistic.
Yeah.
That was just put there for a comparison. Quite
That's
honestly.
Who did the study in 2010-11 with the 1,000?
The same
Same company both years,
It's
10, 11, and 15, 16.
Senate or something like that, architectural firms.
And who did the study? You did the study A, B, and C?
Yes, A, B, and C. Now, with the high school numbers, one thing I can say that may account for the differences between the DPI study and our study, and it is a philosophy for building efficiency. With the 1320, that's every classroom with a class, every bell. Right now, the way it's set up is if a certain teacher is in room, give me a room number, Dr. Manning. F15, okay, F15, somebody's in room F15, that's that teacher's room.
Yeah, you're
So
talking
when
about
that
traveling
teacher-
teachers.
Right, when the
Yeah.
teacher has a
Yeah.
planning bell, that room's empty. And when the teacher has lunch, chances are that room's empty. So it's only being used 60% of the day. When we set this up, that, we just did the same multipliers like we would do in elementary school. The room is used every period.
Why
So
would,
that
why would we do it that way versus DPI's way?
It's just a way of comparison because districts have gone to that. When districts have gone to that, instead of actually kicking into a capacity need, they've actually gone into, the teacher mode of that. And according to, I believe, one of the assistant principals at the high school, the high school used to be in that model inside of the last 10 to 15 years. They were in that model where teachers traveled and the classes were used.
I did.
You had that too?
Right.
Yeah. When they try, so, it is an option to look at, but again, these numbers don't matter, it's what the board is comfortable with. If you wanted to take out, the planning periods and the lunch periods off of there, we could come up with another, number for the high school.
All right, and then lastly, I wanna point this out. I mean, it's like, whatever number, you wanna call it 1,000, you wanna call it 1,500, you wanna call it 1,250, anywhere in between, whatever. All right, let's just, that's 100%. It's like getting on an airplane, flying from the East Coast to the West Coast, with every seat full. And so my thing is, who wants to do that? Doesn't that reduce the level of service, the quality of service, the end product, I don't know, I just think.
Well, we have to look at, we have one cafeteria to serve,
Yeah, no kidding.
and, you know, the library, and the counseling offices, and, you know,
Look,
I kinda like the DPI study that's looking at all North Carolina schools, and,
and I don't understand, if we're paying for a DPI study and the commissioners are signing on it, we're signing on it, then why does it mean nothing? Why do they have a number that's different? Why do we have a number that's different? And they got a number too? Oh my God.
The DPI study, they're here, it's usually one person's here for a week. Never taught, or never was a building administrator, and they're coming up with capacities just based on, you know, a basic rubric that they're
The
given.
current use too, like in some of the elementary schools, the current use was, we had the rooms, so you used, the larger classrooms for something that would have been easily used for,
Yes, ma'am.
supplemental rooms.
And I respect that part, but also like when we had for at least a couple of years now, Moyock Elementary. And this study doesn't show the part that breaks out the numbers for the modular structures, that they equate to 20 pupils per modular. And they don't show the core building number and the modular separated and then show it together. We're seeing a in-unit number here, but what really happens is when you have, say, 5 of those or 4 of those, and they're not using them for educational purposes, and the multiplier is 20, and you got 4 of them not being used for that, you can back out 80 students off that number right there, because you're not using it as what the architect, the building person that's, you know, licensed to tell you.
And we talked about that. Why he put those mobile units having 20 students in it, I don't know. But another thing he didn't do, he didn't count the rooms we were using for non-home rooms. He didn't put any students in those rooms. That's why I was wondering why he put students in the mobile units when he didn't put the students in what used to be a classroom in the primary building, but now it's a computer lab. He put 0 students on that computer lab. If we go to handheld iPads or Chromebooks for the students, they don't need that computer lab. It can turn back into a classroom, and that cancels out one of the trailers having 20 students in it. The 20 students can go in the actual set building.
And I can respect that too, but I mean, they use.
We didn't count any
They
trailers.
use 20 on every modular unit at every campus. They didn't just use it just at that campus. That's what they said the capacity was for those particular structures.
Well, we didn't count any trailers on this
Well,
one. mobile
All right,
units.
so we got,
seeing these big discrepancies kinda makes me wonder, what in the world do we need?
I'll tell you what we need. We need a building specialist that has a non-biased interest from the school system or the commissioners to say, this is what the building could hold.
And I disagree with that. You know, being involved in schools for as long as I've been in schools, it's very simple to define. For example, this is a classroom. Matter of fact, with the square footage in here, this might be a classroom plus. You know, in here, this is a very large classroom. If you look at the lab next door, where we just had our previous meeting, the closed meeting, that's not a full-size room, so that would be looked at as a supplemental breakout room. And that's what we did. There was no bias, it was just counting. And we went through and we counted every room, no matter what it was being used for now. We were counting, if we put a classroom in there, could whatever's in there now function in a supplemental room? And as you can see off to the side, virtually all of our buildings have a pretty nice number of supplemental spaces. And none of the supplemental spaces are like the size of this table and 2 chairs. They're sitting there, they're a couple hundred square feet, 300, 400 square feet, a comfortable place where you could do a breakout session with a small group of students, and not impact the actual classroom sizes.
Yeah, I think, your calculations are probably spot on versus the others, based on you and Matt knowing all the.
Yeah, where we were.
Mhm.
The one surprise I had, I thought we only had 2 rooms, and we'll take Moyock Elementary for example. Randy, you can correct me if I'm wrong. We went into the primary building, we thought we had 2 rooms in there being used for other, thing, there are actually 3. So it's half that building
Right.
that is not being used for classrooms right now. They're being used for other functions. Now, again, I could see where one of the rooms seems to have more openings than the other rooms have, less partial walls in that open classroom concept in that area. But you definitely have 2 classrooms in there that could be used for full-size classes.
And I think to go back to the the joint meeting that we had, when Dan made the point to say, the numbers are important, because we were having a discussion about how different all the numbers were and what.
Well, he started
what's
off
the
saying
right
they
one.
weren't important, actually.
Right, well, and that was his point, is the board has to decide, given all of the numbers, no matter what they are, high, low, in between, is setting that, what do we deem acceptable for that capacity, and then that determines when and where. When are we gonna look to build? Where is that gonna be? And then can we support it? Cause if we know we can support these numbers inside of school capacity, but we build a new school, we're gonna have to pick up those extra teachers for ADM that's not supported from the state funding because we haven't grown in size. So I think that becomes the important part, is some discussion about where do we set those thresholds? What's acceptable at the high school level? Where are we comfortable saying that's the capacity? So we're not at 100%, and then trying to make a decision, but rather being proactive in the discussion about it and moving forward about a high school, an elementary school, a middle school, whatever the case may be. Is gonna,
Well,
And-
the
and in
commissioners
elementary-
advised us to be looking for an elementary school up north and additional high school seats.
I would think they'd be tickled to death to hear that, the lowest number we came back with 1320, and their number was 1215. I would think they'd be all happy with that. I'm not.
Mr. Stefanik, wasn't there a per student envelope size that DPI gave us as a number that we didn't even utilize in our head? Wasn't it 20 square feet per student, per classroom?
That is.
That was a rule of thumb that they gave us, that, I mean, if you look at that number, we're probably under in our calculations.
Right.
And look, I'm not saying you didn't use the information they gave you, but I'm just not real thrilled with a lot of their suggestions and their implementation of their efficiency model for buses, for example, that I call deficiency. And, you know, you're talking about educating kids in high school, and you look at the state average of pupils in high school, and you're gonna find that we've already far exceeded that. And then we're gonna go ahead and keep ratcheting up the capacity. But yet, when they built the building, they had to have an engineer and or architect stamp off on that. But now, we don't have to have any of that. We just keep ratcheting the number up as time goes on. For the life of, I don't, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And I don't think it's conducive for it might be conducive for somebody, not you, I don't take this wrong.
No.
Pushing the numbers and pushing the pencil and making money out of, but it's not conducive for giving a quality end-use product. I can tell you that, not where I'm sitting. And do I wanna pay more taxes? Cause they always say, oh, you're gonna have to raise taxes. Well, of course I don't wanna pay more taxes. Nobody wants to pay more taxes. Is that a trick question? But the reality is, are we gonna keep acting like the problem doesn't exist? Are we gonna keep looking at Moayak Elementary School, and every time it exceeds the DPI study, we're gonna move the number? We're gonna keep moving the number because it's done it twice now. That's just another one. It's done it twice. I mean, it's not you and him. It's for lack of better terms, it's numbers on a pad to somebody, but it's human beings and lives in a class to other people. That's why I'm at with it. I mean,
Okay, you wanted to schedule some tours
yeah.
to show,
Show exactly what
Us.
we're talking about.
you know, where you got the 30 full-size classrooms at Moayak, right? And whatever other schools they wanna go to.
Is that, are you also going to schedule, board meetings with faculty to see how we can help each school?
You can, I would assume that those would be on the same days.
I'm hoping, yeah.
Then we would schedule the tour dates and then, find time to, meet with teachers in small groups if the board wants to have some conversations with the teachers.
Because they don't wanna build a school in this county until they're at like 98% capacity or 101% is actually what one of the numbers was floated to that meeting. Okay? I'm not real comfortable with that. I think in order to have a plan You know, building it after 100%, that's kind of like a reaction. It's not really a plan in my world, or what I do, but call me crazy.
Well, and I'll go out and say that Matt and I had none of those thoughts or
I wasn't
feelings.
saying you did, those are the
I
numbers that
understand,
we're talking
I understand,
about.
I understand. And another, make sure you, in capacity A down there, make sure you look at the last part, I guess it's the last sentence. These numbers in elementary are when the new K-3 class sizes are mandated in full, and so that's the 21-22 school year. Mr. Currituck was right, the difference between the 10-11 study and 15-16 study for part of it is that the K-3 class numbers that now won't be mandated till 21-22, he was using those in 15-16. And so that impacted some of the elementary school numbers as well.
I just have a problem personally, as a taxpayer, not necessarily a board member, just a regular human being, that we have a school and we go from 498 to 583 to 561 to 520. I mean, we're all, at one point in time, at that meeting, we had 100 difference between our number and the commissioner's numbers at the same school. Good grief. Ridiculous.
Yeah, well, this should give us some accurate numbers. And wait till the tours.
It'll be very simple to show you what we consider to be a full-size space and what we consider to be a supplemental space. Very easy to point out. And you'll see where we came up with our counts.
Okay, we'll schedule the tours and that, and I guess we could do maybe 3 schools in a day.
I would think so.
So Mark, are you saying you would be comfortable with putting 1,800, 1,900 kids in our high school?
No. That, I was trying to show, at times, it has been expressed to me that our local funding is just supposed to be extra type services, that we receive all the money we would need from the state to run the school district. And those numbers would be where the capacities would be if we just went off of the state-funded teacher numbers.
I see.
That's what that is. That's just a point of comparison. No, I don't, I've been around high schools that have been 1,800 students, and there's a lot more square footage than Currituck High School has. But that's if, again, the state is saying that in grades 10 through 12, actually, 9 is a little bit smaller, but 10 through 12, 1 to 28 and a half are in the classes. And Dr. Matney, I would be willing to say that we may have a handful of classes now that are that big. And most of them are gym classes, I would assume, right?
Yes.
Okay, and so that's, we don't go to that level, so we've actually put in some local money to make sure that our class sizes don't get to that point. I would say that the 1 to 20, and again, I was involved with a school district that went through the efficiency model, and they came in and they said, you got all this empty classroom space going on at various times during the day when all these people are on planning. And so the district went ahead and implemented every room, every bell, and they went in there and they saw that they had more room for some additional programs in the high school that they didn't think they had room for. You don't have to go that way, but I'm just saying that is a way to go.
When we have the big gym classes, it is hard for them, to go and use the equipment, so I've heard. So, it's not just a matter of instructions in the gym.
Oh, I understand. I'm just saying that those are the only classes right now that seem to tip over that number. We have some exceptions in some other departments, but the general rule, I would say most of the classes are below 25. Are they not?
Yes.
And that's great.
Is it safe to say, or are you saying, are you saying that you're trying to shoot for capacity C? Is that the column that you're projecting that we would be best served, or what?
Capacity, well, I'm not endorsing any of the capacities. I'm just telling you that capacity C is 1 to 20. And when we put extra teachers on our rolls a couple of years ago, we were trying to get 1 to 20 K through 12. An average of 1 to 20 in the buildings, K through 12. That's what that would look like. with 20 kids on average. That doesn't mean you have 20 kids in every class, but 20 kids on average in the building.
And that capacity A, you're trying to show schools run with just state and federal money.
State allocated teachers.
Right.
Yes.
And I know there's a concern, you know, because we've opened some new schools with just state money, so to speak, and the local dollars, and we've run short. So I'm sure we don't wanna open more schools without additional funding, is that what you're saying?
Well, that's what Ms. Dottie was getting at with the ADM.
Right.
If our ADM grows, you know,
We
to
can
Mr.
open the
Cronick's point,
schools.
right, if we start to
Right.
approach 95% at several buildings, then you go for a new building, then when you open up the new one, you may have the ADM to put towards the
Provide the
operation of
services.
that
Yeah.
building. If your ADM doesn't grow and you start opening extra buildings, it's pretty much gonna be 75%, 80% locally funded, because the ADM dollars aren't coming from the state, because you still have the same ADM as you had before.
And we kinda ran into that with probably at least one of our schools when it was built.
You have to check with folks that were around when all those buildings were built.
I know we had a big building boom going and we started building and then everything kinda slowed down and. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead and schedule the tours.
Yep.
Okay, next item, school real estate planning. Julie, you wanna do it?
Well, when we met with the commissioners, I don't know, a couple months ago, they told us to go ahead and start looking for land to build an elementary school. They didn't say necessarily a high school, but they said we were going to need some seats. Maybe a high school, maybe add on to the current high school, maybe utilize the building we had. So, I know I shared with you some land that was available, I brought you some listings. And it's probably been a good 3 months since we met with them. I just wondered, when are we gonna get a plan to start looking for the land?
And we could work that in on our short day of, tours, because if we go 3 a day, you're gonna have one day where you just have one. And maybe the rest of that day, we can start driving around and look at some of the suggested pieces of land and what else is out there. And to see, and as we're cruising to the other buildings to tour, I'm sure we're gonna pass by, some pieces of land that might look, appropriate as well.
And I don't know that we really have to go and look, cause you certainly know, you and Matt know what's more suitable for a school as far as soil goes and what have you, and,
That will involve the county armed services as well.
but I think that if we've gotten the go-ahead from the commissioners, we should certainly go on and start looking. Go on and start buying, really, is what I mean to say,
Well, one thing that I asked Matt Mullen to do is to see how much additional space we have on the Way Up Middle School site. Plus, it was 20 acres we would need for an elementary?
Yeah, the DPI standard was 10 acres plus 1 acre per 180, and that was the standard. One plus one, okay, so it'd be like 20 if we had 1,000 ADM. 20
But if
acres.
you have an elementary school with 500, it would be 15 acres?
Yes.
Okay.
You had a chance to look at the plat for the middle school, or?
Never got a hold of them
Never
today,
got a hold.
and I went to meet with planning and she was in a meeting, so I'll have to check into it again tomorrow.
Well, thanks for checking.
And your thoughts with that were to see if we could put an elementary school there as well?
Yes. And if we had to buy just a small amount of acreage
Next door.
adjacent.
But I would be hesitant to want it to be, of a smaller amount, and then comment to the point that we needed it to grow somewhat similar to how Jarvisburg is, where you could add on to the back of it, and then we didn't purchase enough land to be able to.
Oh, I think 20 is probably what we ought to shoot for.
20.
So that'll be the last day of the tour.
Are they high sandy lots?
One was.
You have to do your
and
soil
one-
studies
One
and
was,
everything.
I'm not sure, because it's got some woods on it.
I don't wanna have a situation where we have to have, your, one company
Yeah.
serving us
I
in the
wanna make
future.
sure it perks this time.
Well, and you know that the
There is a
commissioners
sewage
brought that
ditch.
up, that they got behind the 8 ball, they didn't purchase soon enough. And when they had to have something, they had to take what was available. So that's why we need to move on land now, while it's available, I think.
Yeah, once we identify a piece, we have to send an engineer in there and get samples of the soil to make sure it's gonna be sufficient to hold the, structure of the elementary school.
And I guess at some point, we need to decide which direction we'd like to go as far as the additional high school seats. So could we maybe discuss that at the next work session?
Anything else? Look, I had a couple questions for two of our principals. First one, and this is just to help me understand your school improvement plans. Okay, first one, Carrie. What's the difference between tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3?
So tier 1 is what every child gets. That's your general, what you put out in the classroom. Tier 2 is when the teacher says, all right, majority of my classroom gets this except for this handful of kids. So I'm gonna take a portion of my day and work on these skills to help them be at the same level as everybody else. So sometimes it's presented like a wedding cake. They present it, everybody gets a piece of the bottom of the cake. Some people get the bottom of the cake and a piece of the middle of the cake. And then tier 3 is when we have to give outside supports or extreme supports. That's where my Title I interventionist gets involved, or it's an EC student or something like that, where a kid is sometimes removed, or if somebody pushes in to give that additional support to the child.
Thank you. Next is Angel here. Oh, I didn't know you were born. Okay, in years, it has student data will show an increase in M class. What is
M
M?
classes are benchmark that we use for reading.
Oh. Makes it more understandable now.
Yeah, sorry.
Those are my only
That's
questions.
the state.
Does anybody else have anything to say? Okay, I guess the work session will be closed then.
Bill,
Yeah.
Dr. Ivan, sorry. You okay?
Thank you.
He was inhaling, so.